if there's a specific thinking skill that you want to improve, then you want to do specific exercises to improve those specific skills.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok.
My guest today is ST Rappaport. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about her. 1, since the age of 11, she has been studying how the brain thinks and what we can do to improve it. Imagine that, improving our brain. 2, she's always looking to solve the root cause of any issue instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it. And 3, she absolutely loves learning, but not school. She dropped out of school at age 16. ST, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you so much, George. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
I'm delighted to be talking with you and discovering how I can make my brain work better, because I think that's something that each and every one of us should do continually over time, because we can leave it rusty and inefficient, or we can sharpen it. ST, in particular, you help entrepreneurs who have ADHD gain better control of their brain. Now, I'm curious, do you believe that most entrepreneurs have some form of ADHD?
Some form of something, yeah. I'm not a big believer in getting officially diagnosed or putting certain on labels on, but if we look at stats, it's been proven, research that's at least a third. But when you ask people, I think that is way higher and closer to 2/3, if not 3/4 or something.
So what might be some of the symptoms? How can we do a litmus test on our own brain to see if we are a candidate?
Okay, well, instead of looking to see if you are ADHD or not, if you've got ADHD or not, I want to know which one of your thinking skills are weaker or stronger. Because there are 28 thinking skills. Every single person on this planet uses all 28 of them. Now, also every person on this planet has some stronger ones and weaker ones, because when they're 28, they're just not all going to be equal, right? People with ADHD tend to have similar weak thinking skills. And so if you have some weak thinking skills that we could cover, then that would be sort of candidate. So if, let's say, for example, one weak thinking skill is called clear perception. So can your brain take in a lot of information in a clear and organized way? Or do you just get overwhelmed? When you walk into a messy room that you need to clean, is that overwhelming? When you have a big project to do in your business, do you get overwhelmed and you just push it off and procrastinate on it? Or do you know where to start and how to move forward? That would be an example of one thinking skill.
Let's address the challenge of feeling overwhelmed, because I think that there are times when I start a new project that I can feel overwhelmed, because it just seems like, whoa, this is a big project. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how I'm going to get there. What kind of steps can a person do who feels overwhelmed? How can they feel whelmed?
I like that. How can they feel whelmed? Okay, well, if you think about it, why are you feeling overwhelmed? There's a lot of information that's coming into your brain at the same time. A lot of it is new information, and your brain doesn't know what to do with it. Most of the time, when you learn a piece of information, it gets filed really neatly and organizedly somewhere in your brain. You're learning a new piece about marketing that has to do specifically to email marketing with these types of client, whatever. It's going to get filed away in that file cabinet, right? But when you are starting a new project that you don't have file cabinets for, isn't organized in your brain is like taking all this information and instead of it going neatly away on the shelf, it just has a big pot and all the information is going into the pot and the items in that pot are just getting added and more items are getting added to the pot and more. And then it's overflowing and you're feeling overwhelmed. So one of the first things we want to do if we're feeling really overwhelmed is we want to help our brain slow down and take the information a little bit in a more clear way so it can organize it, even if it doesn't yet know what to do with it. So one of my favorite ways to do that is by going through the five senses. Because we take in information through our five senses, we want to help our brain walk through the five senses and take in the information clearly instead of just pushing it off into this pot. So what you want to do is you want to just ask yourself, okay, what do I see? And list out everything you see related to this overwhelming project. What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? And what do I feel? And you're going to ask each one of them out at a time, and you're going to list them out one at a time. And by simply listing them out one at a time, instead of them all coming into your brain at the same time, they're coming in one at a time. And even just that starts organizing your brain a little bit and calming you down.
So if we organize the input based on the sensory channel, it now gives us a sense of organization, a sense of control, a sense of, oh, this isn't so overwhelming after all.
Yeah, we could walk through an example together if you want. Would you want to try that?
Please do.
Okay, so where would you see yourself or maybe your client where they might be overwhelmed?
I can see that happening with, let's say, launching a new product.
Okay. So what are they going to be overwhelmed by?
Well, there's so much we don't know. We don't know, so we certainly have questions and doubts, and we have bits of information. We don't know what bits of information are more relevant than others. We can get opinions from people who want to give us advice, and we don't know who to listen to. And so, yeah, I can see feeling overwhelmed there.
Yeah. And all this is just sitting like a mush in the brain, right? It's like the opinions from the experts and the opinions from the non-experts, and there's the facts and there's the data and there's all the stuff we don't know, right? And all that is just mushed out. And so if we could go through the five senses and write it out, then that will be a lot clearer for our brain. So for example, we might want to say, okay, what do I see? What do I see related to this project? And that might be a stat. That might be an email. That might be something that you can see, anything that you can see. What do I hear related to this? That might be those opinions from all our amazing friends who are doing their very best to try to help us, right? And as you do that and you write it down, or you even just say it out loud, writing it down is best. But if you're in a place where you can't and you just say it out loud, instead of being so much opinions and I don't know where to start and so much I don't know, it's okay, this person said opinion one, this is a fact we don't know. This is a fact we do know. And automatically your brain, even if it can't organize it perfectly, is hey, my friend or my next door neighbor who gave me this opinion, that I know is less important. But this expert that I paid 5 figures to speak to, I'm going to take what they said a little bit more seriously.
And are some people of the five senses, do people tend to trust some senses more than others?
That's a really interesting question that I don't know. I do know that we get most of our information through our sight. So about 80% of the information is from your sight. So if you go through it and you're I have such a long list of things that I see, that's normal. But I don't know. It's an interesting one. I got to do research on that, George.
Good. And I know that for myself, when I'm working on a challenge, it helps me if I write things down, whether it's ideas or the situation or the challenge or even the fears, the concerns. And I typically either do it on a piece of paper or a whiteboard or a flip chart. And I like it on the whiteboard or flip chart because I can use different color markers, which now I can see it. And now I go, oh, this doesn't look so overwhelming after all.
Yeah. So there's a couple things happening there while you're writing. Firstly, what we have thinking is not only split into 28 thinking skills, it's actually split also into 3 phases of thinking. We have input where you take in the information. So right now you're listening to the podcast and you are taking in information. You're listening, you're taking information. Second phase is elaboration. This is where you're processing it. And then the third phase is the output. It's what you do with it. It's who you talk to. It's what you write, etc. Now, when you are writing the things out, you are helping your brain get clearer on the processing, because in order to write it, it has to be clearer in your brain. So when it's just sitting there in your brain, it's still a mush. But as soon as it has to go onto that whiteboard, all of a sudden that whiteboard, the words are being processed even further and even deeper, and it gets more organized.
And I suppose for some people, it might be a matter of where they simply talk to themselves.
Yes, it's the same sort of thing, right? Because it's also output. It's another way where it is coming out. Some people talk to themselves. Some people need more talk to somebody else, whatever it is. But some sort of way of getting it out lets it walk through all 3 phases, so it processes it more and it's less overwhelming.
ST, your interest in ADHD, is that because you consider yourself in that category?
So I've never personally been diagnosed. I have quite a few family members who have been. So I grew up with it all around me. But what I like about it most is actually the energy and the creativity and what comes with it. I think that people with ADHD are the real movers and shakers of this world. Anyone who's done anything really big in this world most definitely has ADHD. And I just love being around such people.
Now, that's an interesting concept, that ADHD people are the movers and shakers because
of how their brain thinks, and because of their superpowers, or essentially they're going to take action really quickly. They're going to much more creative. Their brain thinks in different sorts of ways, and it helps them see things that other people don't see. Those are the general thing. There are a couple other things that can often help. For example, sometimes they're even more blinded by what is needed to happen in order to make it work, which works really well in their favor. So they think, let's say, to achieve this goal, I only need to do XYZ. I could do that goal, no problem. And they're blinded by the fact that there might be 100 more things to do, which sometimes works really well for them and sometimes really makes it really hard for them. It works really well. They get started, they're passionate, they're in the project, and they go for something super ambitious, super crazy. Sometimes it gets in the way. It's when they start realizing all the things that they need to do, that sometimes they want to give up. So as long as they have the perseverance part, they'll do things like Elon Musk sending people to Mars, or Richard Branson, creating massive brands and things like that, where it's literally putting the creativity together with the execution and being able to do that really well. Yeah.
So Elon Musk thinking about, let's go to Mars. I might have had a moment, or sometimes he was dreaming and thinking about that and say, yeah, that would be a good idea, without even considering all the details. And sometimes it's a good idea not to consider all the details, because if you did, it would overwhelm you and scare you.
Very well said, George. It's exactly what it is, right? It's not a good or bad. I think I like to look at it, taking it to another level. So if you are the type of person that sees all the details, and in a way that's super good, that's your superpower, and you can actually be better risk taker. And it doesn't mean that you can't achieve these crazy goals. If you have these crazy things like going to Mars or whatever your personal goal is, you are in a way more prepared, as long as you don't get overwhelmed by it, but you use it, okay, this is what we need to do. Then you already know what you're facing. So in a way, you have a different sort of advantage.
ADHD, are they the fast movers?
For the most part. Depends. There's different types of ADHD. You could get very scientific in it. Like I said, I really like to stick out of it because I do think there's a big limit that's also put on ADHD. A lot of the way people talk about ADHD today is what people with ADHD can or cannot do. And for example, let's say people with ADHD are often really bad with time. They struggle with time blindness, right? And so they're okay, you'll just never be on time. You need to put 100 reminders, have the people around you remind you, you're just never going to be on time. Now, it's true, you may be struggling with time, but it doesn't mean you need to struggle with time your whole life. at this moment in time, you're struggling in time. Your brain can learn to understand time, and you can be really good, and you can remove that time blindness. So that's why I like to not so much like label people and things like that.
You meant there's 28 thinking skills or brain functions, I believe you said. Are some of them more important than others, or do they all have equal value? Are there some we can ignore?
None we can ignore. Any one of them that you are weak in will be affecting you. However, some have more weight than others. So, for example, clear perception, right? Like taking in the information in a clear and organized way. If that is weak, you're basically not going to be able to do anything. Well, obviously, it depends how weak it is, but like that means as soon as there's like a little bit of information, you're just getting overwhelmed, then you're just going to be overwhelmed all the time and really not be able to grow your business or do any task or even do something as simple as cook dinner, right? So it depends. All of them, they're not like, are you good or bad at them? It's more like a scale, and it's like, how good are you or how weak is it for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now, while you're saying that, another thought came to me is, do you believe that people can multitask?
No.
Okay.
What we do is we task switch.
Hmm.
Yes, we are switching tasks really, really quickly from task to task. This includes if you have ADHD. I know a lot of people think they have ADHD and they can multitask really well. But if you observe yourself, what you're actually doing is you're switching from task to task really, really quickly. Only exception to this is when you're doing a task that doesn't require brain power. Then let's say, for example, if you're driving in a route, like you're just driving down the highway, like 60 miles an hour, and it's like just not thinking, and you have a podcast playing, you could still be listening to your intended message, right? Like you're still listening to the podcast. However, if out of nowhere a car comes and cuts you off, or all of a sudden like there's a bike that like a pedestrian or something that like you weren't expecting, those few seconds you suddenly stopped and you were focused on the road, you're more focused on the road, your brain didn't hear what was in that podcast. You will literally, if you want to hear what was said, will have to go back that couple of seconds to hear it because your brain was shut off. So you can multitask until when one of the things like don't need brain power, essentially.
And curious that you mentioned that example. I know that when I'm in my car, when I'm driving to a new location, someplace I haven't been, and I'm searching for street signs or guidance, if I have the radio on, I turn it off.
Yes. Yep.
Because the radio makes it harder to read.
Yes, because your brain is trying to focus on the radio and trying to read the signs, and you can multitask because no one can multitask. So that's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that, George.
My pleasure. And now, what are some of the exercises that a person can do to strengthen their weaker functions?
Okay. Well, let's start like this. You want to make sure you are always, 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 always doing new and challenging tasks. If you want to keep your brain young, you want to do new and challenging, not just new and not just challenging. Put those two together. Those are the best way for you to keep your brain young and prevent any of the elderly diseases that any of us want related to the brain. If there's a specific thinking skill that you want to improve, then you want to do specific exercises to improve those specific skills. So there are 28 of them and we have endless amount of exercises, but like I just go back to clear perception. Start off there, right? Like, are you able to take in a lot of information at a time, and is your brain able to calm down? If not, the exercise to improve that is going through your 5 senses. Now, what you'll start noticing is that in the beginning, you'll have to go like, what do I see? And list all the things you see. What do you hear? And list all the things. Over time, you're going to need to do it less and less. Your brain is going to be able to take in more and more information without getting overwhelmed. So if right now you get overwhelmed when you walk into a messy room, soon you'll be able to do that no problem and you'll be able to walk into a messy house. Or right now you get overwhelmed when you write an email campaign, but soon if you do it, you'll only get overwhelmed if you're like planning a massive like emails for the next 6 months for like a bunch of campaigns together or whatever it is. Your ability to do, because it's not good or bad, but your ability to do clear perception goes up.
That's interesting. And keep your brain young by doing new and challenging things. And so I'm wondering, should I actually learn how to play bridge?
Anything new and challenging, it'll keep your brain young. But the thing is, after a little bit, bridge is not going to be new and challenging. You'll need something else.
Mm. Mm. And by doing that, we keep our brain young because we're learning.
Yeah, more specifically, because you are creating complete new neuron networks and neuron connections. So when you're doing something new, when you're doing something challenging, like it hasn't done before, it's creating, like it's going down that network again, and it's a little bit more of a bumpy road, right? But when it's new, it's a completely new road. I like to think of like the neurons in our brain like a forest, right? If you walk into the forest and there's no path, the first time you walk down that path, it's hard. Like there's a bunch of twigs and a bunch of rocks, and it's really hard. But over time, if you continue walking down that same path, then you don't think about it anymore. It goes there automatically, right? It's easy to walk and it's just easy to go. And as long as you continue doing it, that you continue walking there, your path will continue to grow. Will still be there. And so in your brain, you want to make new paths constantly and grow those neural connections.
New paths. Now that's interesting. I remember Albert Einstein's brain was studied, was dissected at a local university. And one of the questions was, well, did he have a bigger brain than other people? Were some parts of his brain bigger? And they found out that he had just a regular sized brain, but his brain had all these pathways, many more pathways than usual. And because he spent a lot of time asking unanswerable questions about the universe, and that helped him develop these paths within his brain. And so I'm wondering, is one way to develop those pathways is by asking incredible questions of ourselves that get us going in, whether it's fantasy or just.
Yeah, it's a good question, George, because today we could ask any question to Google or AI and get us some sort of answer. And that doesn't really give us what we're looking for. But what I absolutely love about questions is curious questions like trigger learning. So if you're not just going to ask some sort of machine to answer it for you, but it is something that you are going to start researching, reading books on, speaking to experts on, trying out experiments, right? A lot of what Albert Einstein did was like was experiments and trying things out. So he didn't just, yes, he did a lot of thinking, which is super important, but it's part of what happens because of that question. I'm curious, do you have like any big question that like you would love to explore if you made it a focus?
Now that's a curious question. And yes, I do ask a lot of questions of myself. Probably one of the questions that I ask over and over again is, why do people act the way they do? What influences their behavior? What's going on? What are they seeing? What are they perceiving? And how is that influencing their behavior? And why is this person behaving in a different way than this other person with what I see as the same stimulus?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And obviously there's various reasons for it. My favorite one, it's not the only reason, but it does have a very big effect, is actually because of their thinking skills. So even though two people have the same stimulus, depending on where their thinking skills are going to respond to it differently. Part of it is obviously their life experience, which also affects their thinking skills. So a lot of it is like very connected and intertwined. But that's why, have you ever had a conversation with like two or like more than just you and another person, it was three or more people, and you said a sentence or said a story or something, and or you made a comment about some idea, and they each perceived it really differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of this reason, because of their thinking skills and how they understood it and how they see it relates to their life and how they see it in this world. That will be because of their thinking skills.
Mm. How can a team leader, how can they get a better idea of the thinking skills of their team? Without labeling people, how can they just get a better understanding of how this person thinks and how this person thinks, and what are the right strengths that I can get from this person because of the way they think?
Yeah.
How can a leader make those?
Okay, so there's different ways we could approach it. The first thing you could do is I have a free assessment that everyone could take for themselves, and I highly encourage teams to also do it. So everybody understands where everyone is at. And this is not about like, oh, shaming, you're at a lower level versus this, but it's more about understanding how we work together and how we complement each other, right? So that could be taken at lifebakersuniversity.com/brain, and you just download the PDF for everybody to take it. It takes under 10 minutes. And you can just like compare them side by side and see like, oh, this person is really good at clear perception, so we're going to use them for these things. And this person is really good at defining the problem. So when we have a problem, we know who to go to. That's the first thing. The second thing, what's interesting is people usually gravitate towards what they are good at. So if you see an employee is like initiating certain sort of conversations or solving different types of problems, that will be because their brain is really good at it. Now, I'm going to caution you a little bit. While you most definitely want to be working on with everyone's strengths and doing what people are good at, I challenge you to also help your employees improve their thinking skills. If you can help them improve a thinking skill, then they will be a much greater asset like to your business because it's going to improve in so many areas. So even if an employee is really good at a certain thinking skill, maybe you can give it to someone else, or maybe they can work on it together so they can learn together to improve that thinking skills. There's many different ways we can do it. But the point is there's a lot of team, like finding strengths sort of like assessments and things like that. And while that is really good, don't let it limit you.
And a reminder for listeners that you can find the link to that assessment in the description below. ST, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could offer advice to a business leader on how they can get a better understanding of their own brain skills, their weaknesses and strengths. Of course, the assessment is one way, my guess is, but what else can they do on a regular basis to make these different attributes work together more of the time?
Yeah. So another way to spot really quickly if you have a weak thinking skill is to see what you're procrastinating on. Because just like you gravitate towards what you're good at, your brain doesn't want to work hard and will procrastinate on something that you have a challenge in. So anytime you find yourself being like, you should be doing the more important task, and all of a sudden you find something that you should be doing, I need to find all sort of reasons of why all of a sudden this task was more important. And then a day passes and another day passes and another day passes and you don't do the big task. I challenge you to ask yourself this question. What part of this task does my brain not like? Because most tasks have many micro tasks that together make the task. Like if you think of sending an email or replying to an email, you have to read the email, you have to understand the email, you have to formulate your response, you have to write the response, you have to proofread it. There's like all these little parts to responding to an email that like we just do automatically, but sometimes it gets in the way. And so if you can identify which part of the task is the challenge, then you can solve that issue. And instead of trying to hype yourself up to do this task or give yourself a timer to like sit down and focus on this task or find some sort of external reason of how you can do the task, but actually understand what part of the task is a challenge for your brain, then you can work on that challenge and that task will no longer be a challenge.
And that's valuable advice, ST, because I'm thinking that I'm not going to let you look at my day timer, whether the things that I keep moving from this week to next week because I didn't do it last week. But
George, you're not alone.
Now I've got the answer. What part of this task does my brain not like? My guest today is ST Rappaport, reminding you that you can keep your brain young by taking on new and challenging actions, new ideas.
If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.